Now, before actually creating the player character's idle and run animations, I thought it would be best to first of all introduce you to some of Unity's fundamental animation features. First of all, we need to open up Unity's animation timeline, which you can find under the window menu. I'll now select my player character, and you'll see that I can click on this create new animation button, which I will immediately do. I'll be prompted to save my animation somewhere in my project. I'll create a new folder alongside my sprite and scenes one called animations, and save my animation right here, calling it test for example. Once that's done, we'll have access to this pretty simple looking animation timeline. Let's get this character moving from a point A to a point B and back again. Now there's one fundamental rule when animating your characters in Unity. Don't animate the root object. The root object must only be used to add components to the character, such as colliders and scripts, which in turn will get the character moving. With that said, I'll hit this red record button. From now on, any body part we move will be animated. So I'll select the body, which I remind you has the head, eyes, and arms as its children, as well as the legs. I'll then move this white line to about 1 second on the timeline, and then move my character a bit to the right. I can now hit this play button, and you'll see that my character moves from one position to another and then snaps back into place. You'll also notice these little diamond shapes on the timeline. These are keyframes. They basically store information of where each body part is, what's its rotation, scale, and so on, and when on the timeline. So these keyframes have stores the character at this position, and these keyframes have the character at this position. You can of course move these keyframes around the timeline. So for example, say you wanted the character to move from point A to B faster, you can do so by selecting the last keyframes. To select keyframes, just left click on them. To select multiple keyframes, you can hold down shift and left click. And of course you can also select every single keyframe of a given time by left clicking on the topmost one. So I'll select all the keyframes at 1 second, and holding down the left mouse button, drag them over to the left, stopping at about 30 milliseconds for example. And you'll see that instead of taking 1 second, the character takes half that much time to play his basic animation. But I'll undo that with Ctrl Z. Let me now get my character's head moving up, leaving his body midway through the animation. So I'll select my head, and then at 30 milliseconds, I'll move the head upwards. Of course, make sure that your record button is still activated, or no keyframes will be placed, and as a result, the head going up won't be part of the animation. Hitting play, you'll now see that indeed, my head goes up. Awesome. However, the character snapping back when the animation is complete doesn't look great. Let's get the animation looping. In other words, have the last keyframes, or last part of the animation, see that character with the exact same position, rotation, and scale as the first position. We can do so very easily by shift selecting all the keyframes at the start and copying them with Ctrl C, and then pasting them at around 2 seconds with Ctrl V. And now you'll see that my character moves right and then back to his starting pose. Of course, you can delete keyframes by simply selecting them and hitting the delete key on your keyboard. Note that you can view your animation in slow motion by simply clicking on some empty space in the timeline and dragging left and right, as fast or slowly as you like. Also, you can zoom in and out of your timeline by scrolling with the middle mouse button, which is necessary if you want to make longer animations. Once you've finished animating for the time being, make sure to deactivate this record button so that you don't accidentally animate stuff you don't want. Now of course you can also animate the character's rotation, scale, any component you like really. For example, I'll grab my character's arm and rotate it at roughly 20 milliseconds. I'll also make sure to copy all those first keyframes and paste them at the end of the animation again so that my animation still loops. I can also select my character's head and then squash it with the scale tool at around 40 milliseconds, and again I'll copy and paste my first keyframes. And as I said a moment ago, you can also animate any component attached to your character. For example, I can animate the color of the sprite render, turning the head from white to red for example at 30 milliseconds. So as you can see, animating in Unity is really straightforward and pretty powerful. By animating components and the character's body parts, you can come up with all kinds of epic animated creations. Okay, before wrapping up the video, I'm moving on to the next, where we will actually animate our player's idle and run animations. Let's take a look at some other features found inside of the animation timeline. For example, the samples, which will, depending on its value, slow down or speed up your animation. A low value will slow down your animation, and a higher value will speed it up. So as you can see, this can be pretty useful at times. There's of course these buttons up here, this one to play the animation and this one to record it, and of course there's also these. This one will snap you from one keyframe bunch to the next, and this one will bring you right to the end of your animation. Same for these except backwards. This area here gives you information about each keyframe. For example, we see here that these keyframes are related to the head's position, and these handle the leg's position. You can of course click this little icon to delete all keyframes related to the head or leg's position, for example. Also, you'll notice a Add Property button. This will add a keyframe at the start and end of your animation of a given property. For example, say you wanted to animate the body's rotation. You could simply select the body, hit Add Property, Transform Rotation, and there we go! Those two keyframes were added and I can now animate the character's body rotation, but frankly I've hardly ever used this Add Property button. Hitting the red record button and directly begin animating is faster and just feels more intuitive. And to get my animation looping, all I need to do is copy and paste my first keyframes. With that all said, I really urge you to have fun with the animation timeline. Animate components, your body parts position, rotation and scale. Once you're satisfied and feel more at ease using Unity's animation tools, I'll see you in the next video where we'll create the character's run and idle animation. And once that's done, my brother Liam will take over for the first programming video, in which he'll show you how to move this character using the arrow keys with a simple C# script. Okay, see you soon.